On February 14th, 1943, at an altitude of 18,000 feet above Bougainville in the Solomon Islands, the Japanese Navy's aviation arm encountered for the first time a formidable fighter that would systematically erode their dominance of the skies over the Pacific. This American aircraft, painted a deep blue and easily recognizable even from a distance by its distinctive inverted gull wings, executed a vertical ascent that defied the very principles of aerial combat as understood by Japanese pilots. It climbed past 20,000 feet, then 22,000, continuing its powerful ascent with reserves of energy to spare, while the Mitsubishi Zero, the esteemed pride of the Imperial Japanese Navy, struggled to reach its operational altitude limits. This was the Vought F4U Corsair, a plane that would soon earn the ominous moniker of Whistling Death, due to the peculiar sound produced by its wing root oil coolers during high-speed dives. Within a mere 18 months, this singular aircraft type would psychologically shatter the elite pilot corps of the Imperial Japanese Naval Air Service, inflicting a crushing demonstration of technological superiority that rendered obsolete every tactical doctrine Japanese aviators had painstakingly honed since 1937. What transpired on that particular Valentine's Day was far more than just another aerial skirmish. It heralded the dawn of systematic technological supremacy that would transform Japan's most seasoned pilots from hunters into the hunted, from self-assured warriors into individuals who would deliberately evade engagement upon spotting those iconic inverted gull wings. To fully grasp the profound psychological impact the Corsair inflicted, one must first appreciate the immense confidence held by Japanese naval aviators in the early months of 1943. These were the elite survivors of what was widely considered the world's most selective aviation training regimen. The Yokosuka Naval Aviation Preparatory Course accepted fewer than 2% of all applicants. Those fortunate enough to be chosen endured 3 years of rigorous training, a process that claimed more candidates' lives than the Americans lost in some of their major engagements. By 1943, the average Japanese carrier pilot had accumulated over 800 flight hours, with many veterans of the China campaign boasting more than 2,000 hours of experience. They had already revolutionized naval warfare at Pearl Harbor, stunned the British forces at Singapore, and established unchallenged air superiority from Burma to the Gilbert Islands. In 1942 alone, the Mitsubishi A6M0 achieved an astonishing 12-to-1 kill ratio against Allied fighters. Japanese pilots had perfected energy tactics designed to exploit their aircraft's strengths, unparalleled maneuverability, exceptional range, and superb visibility. The Zero could outturn any Allied fighter, fly farther than any opponent, and in the hands of experienced pilots, seemed utterly invincible. The Imperial Japanese Navy's fighter doctrine, refined over 6 years of combat in China, emphasized individual prowess and aggressive maneuvers. Their pilots were instilled with the belief that spiritual fortitude, the warrior's ethos of Bushido, would triumph over material disadvantages. This philosophy had consistently proven effective against Chinese aviators, against British Hurricanes, and against American P-40S and F-4F Wildcats. Each successive victory reinforced their conviction that skill and spirit trumped technological advancement and armor plating. The initial arrival of the Corsair in the Solomon Islands was perceived as merely another American attempt to match the Zero through sheer brute force. Marine Fighting Squadron 124, VMF 124, deployed the first 12 F4U Corsairs to Guadalcanal on February 12, 1943. Japanese reconnaissance units promptly identified the new aircraft's striking appearance, its inverted gull wings, massive four-bladed propeller, and exceptionally long nose extending far forward of the cockpit. The first engagement occurred on February 14th, Valentine's Day, when Corsairs provided escort for PB-4Y-1 Liberator bombers on a mission targeting Kaili Airfield on Bougainville. This encounter, later infamously dubbed the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, proved initially disastrous for the Americans, resulting in the loss of 9 Allied aircraft compared to a single Zero destroyed. However, the engagement inadvertently revealed something critical to the Japanese pilots. These new American fighters possessed performance characteristics that fundamentally altered the dynamics of air combat. The Corsairs eschewed traditional turning engagements. Instead, they ascended above the Zeros, an altitude no previous American fighter had managed to reach, and executed high-speed diving attacks. They utilized their immense speed advantage to disengage before Japanese pilots could react, then performed zoom climbs back to altitude, completely immune to pursuit. Technical specifications that Japanese intelligence meticulously gathered on the F4U Corsair revealed an overwhelming disparity in capabilities. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp engine generated 2,000 horsepower at takeoff, boosted to 2,250 horsepower in combat with water injection. In contrast, the Zero's Nakajima Sakai 21 engine produced only 1,130 horsepower at takeoff. This was not merely a power advantage. It represented an entirely different class of aircraft. The maximum speed figure starkly illustrated this disparity. The Corsair could achieve 417 miles per hour at 19,900 feet, whereas the Zero Model 52, Japan's most advanced variant in 1943, could barely reach 351 miles per hour. In a dive, the difference became terrifying. Corsairs routinely exceeded 500 miles per hour while maintaining structural integrity. Zeros, however, began experiencing control surface flutter at 360 miles per hour and structural failure above 410 miles per hour. The climbing performance data was equally sobering. The Corsair could reach 20,000 feet in 7.7 minutes, boasting a climb rate of 2,890 feet per minute under standard conditions, or 3,210 feet per minute with war emergency power. The Zero required 11 minutes to attain the same altitude. Above 25,000 feet, where the Corsair remained powerful and responsive, the Zero became sluggish and barely controllable. The American fighter's service ceiling of 36,900 feet might as well have been outer space for Japanese pilots, whose aircraft struggled to operate effectively above 33,000 feet. The disparity in armament proved psychologically devastating. The Corsair was equipped with 6 Browning M2.50 caliber machine guns, each firing 850 rounds per minute with a muzzle velocity of 2,840 feet per second. This delivered a total weight of fire of 69 pounds of metal per second. The Zero's armament, consisting of 2 7.7mm machine guns and 2 20mm cannons, delivered only 13 pounds per second, and the cannons carried a mere 60 rounds per gun, sufficient for only 7 seconds of firing. Japanese pilots soon discovered that Corsairs were virtually indestructible compared to their unarmored Zeros. The F4U incorporated 155 pounds of armor plate around the cockpit, along with self-sealing fuel tanks and armored oil coolers. Cannon shells that would obliterate a Zero often merely damaged Corsairs, which frequently returned to base with hundreds of bullet holes. This remarkable survivability fundamentally altered combat dynamics. American pilots could afford to be aggressive, even reckless, knowing their aircraft could absorb errors. Japanese pilots had but a single opportunity. One misstep meant certain death. Their aircraft, designed for peak performance through minimal weight, offered no protection whatsoever. The Zero achieved its legendary maneuverability by being the lightest possible fighter, devoid of armor, self-sealing tanks, and with its structure minimized. However, the Corsair demonstrated that American industrial might had overcome the weight penalty. They produced engines powerful enough to carry armor and still outperform unprotected fighters. They engineered aircraft capable of forgiving pilot errors, equipment malfunctions, and even lucky hits. Luxuries Japanese pilots could never anticipate. Rabaul, Japan's heavily fortified bastion in the Southwest Pacific, became the stage for the Corsair's systematic dismantling of Japanese naval aviation. Here, at Japan's most formidable base outside the home islands, the cream of Japanese fighter units concentrated their efforts to halt the American advance. By October 1943, when Major Gregory Pappy Boyington's Black Sheep Squadron, VMF-24, arrived with their F4U Corsairs, the psychological equilibrium had already irrevocably shifted. Japanese pilots no longer spoke of victory, but of survival. On December 17, 1943, Boyington led 31 Corsairs in escort of a bombing mission targeting Rabaul. The Japanese scrambled 40 Zeros to intercept, deploying their finest pilots and their most advanced aircraft. The Corsairs climbed to 25,000 feet, an altitude at which Zeros struggled to maneuver effectively. As the Japanese ascended to engage, the Americans dove through their formation at speeds approaching 450 miles per hour, delivered brief, controlled bursts of fire, and then executed zoom climbs back to altitude. The Zeros, unable to pursue, unable to escape, and unable to force a close-quarters engagement, lost 11 aircraft, with only 2 Corsairs sustaining damage. The psychological terror inflicted by the Corsair extended beyond mere performance statistics. The aircraft's distinctive sonic signature became a weapon in itself. The oil cooler intakes in the wing roots produced an unforgettable whistling shriek during high-speed dives. Japanese pilots reported hearing this sound even in their sleep, developing involuntary reactions to any similar noise. The Corsair's visual appearance amplified this dread. Its inverted gull wings presented a predatory silhouette unlike any other aircraft. The colossal propeller, 13 feet 4 inches in diameter, the largest ever fitted to a fighter, gave it a brutal, purposeful mien. The dark blue paint scheme rendered it nearly invisible against the sea when diving from above. American pilots deliberately enhanced this psychological warfare. They would execute terror dives without firing, solely to generate the whistling sound over Japanese airfields. Boyington's Black Sheep Squadron famously painted shark mouths on their Corsairs, further amplifying their predatory image. By mid-1943, Japan faced a grim mathematical reality. The Corsair, alongside other advanced American fighters, was decimating experienced pilots at a rate far exceeding Japan's capacity to train replacements. Pre-war, Japanese naval aviators typically received between 500 and 700 flight hours before their combat assignments. By 1943, fuel shortages and losses of training aircraft had reduced this to a mere 150 hours. By 1945, new pilots were entering combat with as little as 40 to 60 hours of flight time, barely proficient enough to handle their aircraft, let alone engage Corsairs. The psychological toll on veteran pilots was devastating. They found themselves paired with novices who stood no chance against Corsairs, forcing them to watch their protégés perish while attempting to protect them. The traditional mentorship system collapsed under the relentless pressure of constant attrition. Veterans who faced Corsairs in 1943 accurately predicted the catastrophic consequences that would unfold when American carrier aviation fully deployed its new generation of fighters. At the Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944, F-6F Hellcats, sharing the Corsair's powerful engine and exhibiting similar performance characteristics, underscored this prediction's accuracy in an engagement Americans termed the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. Approximately 400 to 450 Japanese aircraft were annihilated, compared to 130 American planes lost. Many Japanese pilots never even sighted their attackers, falling victim to fighters they could neither climb to engage nor outmaneuver in dives. The personal accounts of pilots who encountered Corsairs illuminate the profound psychological transformation from confidence to abject terror. First Lieutenant Kenneth Walsh of VM F124, who became the first Corsair ace on May 13, 1943, described typical engagements where Japanese pilots appeared utterly helpless against the Corsair's superior performance. Walsh achieved 21 victories in Corsairs over a 6-month period, later remarking that the Corsair rendered aerial combat unfair due to its overwhelming advantages in speed, climb, dive, armor, and firepower. He characterized fighting Zeros as a purely mechanical process. Climb above them, dive through their formation at speeds they couldn't match, fire a short burst, zoom climb to safety, and repeat. Lieutenant Robert Hansen's remarkable record, achieving 20 Japanese aircraft destroyed in a mere 17 days between January 14th and January 30th, 1944, exemplifies the Corsair's absolute dominance. Flying with VMF 215, Hansen exploited the Corsair's advantages so effectively that Japanese formations would scatter upon the mere sighting of approaching Corsairs. As 1943 transitioned into 1944, improved variants of the Corsair further widened the performance gap. The F4U introduced a bubble canopy for enhanced visibility, water injection for increased combat power, and improved armor protection. The F4U variant possessed the capability to carry 4,000 pounds of bombs, exceeding the payload of many Japanese bombers, while still outperforming any Japanese fighter. Japanese efforts to counter the Corsair revealed their deepening technological desperation. The Zero Model 52 incorporated armor and self-sealing tanks, but this added weight severely compromised its maneuverability without offering substantial survivability. The new Kawanishi N1K George fighter showed promise, but was plagued by unreliable engines and complex hydraulic systems that frequently failed. The deployment of F4U two night fighter variants in 1944 introduced a new dimension of terror. Equipped with APS-4 airborne radar, these 36 specially modified Corsairs hunted Japanese aircraft in the darkness, previously their sole sanctuary. The psychological impact of being stalked in the night by an unseen predator shattered the last remnants of Japanese pilot confidence. The ultimate psychological defeat manifested with the adoption of kamikaze tactics in late 1944. This shift from warriors seeking victory to pilots seeking only a meaningful death represented a complete capitulation to technological inferiority. Vice Admiral Takajiro Onishi, the architect of the kamikaze program, privately acknowledged the true motivation behind these suicide attacks. Conventional aerial combat against Corsairs and Hellcats had become an impossibility. By late 1944, the exchange ratio had swung to a staggering 15-to-1 in favor of American fighters. Rather than face a meaningless demise in hopeless engagements, Japanese pilots sought to die with purpose against Allied warships. American pilots flying Corsairs accumulated victories at rates that would have been unimaginable in 1942. Major Gregory "Pappy" Boyington scored 22 of his 26 victories in Corsairs within a mere 84 days. These astounding scores were not solely attributable to superior skill, but to an overwhelming technical advantage. The Japanese themselves recognized this reality. Their most accomplished pilots understood that American aces were a product of their aircraft, not merely their individual prowess. The machine had supplanted the man, a complete reversal of traditional Japanese fighter doctrine. The Corsair embodied American industrial might in its most concentrated form. Vought produced 12,571 Corsairs during the war, a figure exceeding Japan's total fighter production from 1942 to 1945. Each Corsair incorporated 13,000 pounds of aluminum, 1,000 pounds of steel, 18 miles of electrical wiring, and 2,000 individual instruments and controls. The Pratt & Whitney R-2800 engine alone encapsulated American industrial supremacy, with its 2,800 cubic inches of displacement, 18 cylinders arranged in 2 rows, sophisticated supercharging, and precision engineering tolerances that Japan could not replicate, even with captured examples. While Japan was scraping the bottom of its manpower reserves, dispatching teenagers with minimal training to confront Corsairs, America was mass-producing pilots with industrial efficiency. The U.S. Navy trained 60,000 pilots during the war, each receiving 600 flight hours, including 200 hours in advanced fighters. American pilots arrived in the Pacific, having expended more ammunition in training than most Japanese pilots fired in combat. They meticulously studied gun camera footage, analyzed combat reports, and underwent continuous tactical refinement. Japanese pilot training, conversely, had devolved into a futile exercise. New pilots arrived with less than 100 total flight hours, having never fired their guns in training, never practiced high-altitude combat, and never experienced high-speed dives. The Corsair's evolution into a fighter bomber in 1944 introduced another layer of dread. Equipped to carry bombs, rockets, and napalm, Corsairs could obliterate airfields, shipping, and infrastructure with impunity. This multi-role versatility meant Corsairs could appear anywhere, at any time, in any capacity, adding strategic uncertainty to tactical terror. Saburo Sakai, Japan's most renowned surviving ace with 64 victories, offered a clear post-war assessment of facing Corsairs. He described recognizing that the war was lost upon encountering the Corsair, not because of a single aircraft, but because America could produce such machines by the thousands, while Japan struggled to maintain its existing designs. Sakai noted that survival against Corsairs necessitated complete avoidance of engagement. When Japanese pilots spotted those distinctive bent wings, they would dive for the deck, flee into the clouds, or employ any means necessary to evade combat. This was not an act of cowardice, but a pragmatic recognition of inescapable reality. Engaging a Corsair in a Zero had become an act of suicide. By early 1945, the statistics painted a picture of utter annihilation. Corsairs claimed 2,140 aerial victories against 189 losses in air combat, a remarkable 11.3 to 1 ratio. However, these figures failed to capture the full extent of the psychological devastation. Numerous Japanese aircraft fled without engaging, while others were destroyed on the ground by marauding Corsairs. Countless pilots refused to take off when Corsair sightings were reported. The ultimate indignity came from production figures. In 1945 alone, America manufactured 7,829 fighters of all types. Japan managed only 1,114, most of which were inferior to designs from 1942. The Corsair production line alone surpassed Japan's entire aviation industry in output. The Corsair's overwhelming dominance fundamentally shattered core tenets of Japanese military culture. The concept of Yamato Damashi, the unique Japanese spirit believed to overcome material disadvantages, proved hollow when confronted with insurmountable technological superiority. The traditional emphasis on individual warrior skill became irrelevant when skill alone could not surmount performance disparities. The most experienced Japanese ace in the most meticulously maintained Zero stood no chance against an average American pilot in a Corsair. This stark reality undermined the philosophical underpinnings of Japanese military training. The Battle of Okinawa from April to June 1945 provided the Corsair's final, definitive demonstration of superiority. Marine and Navy Corsairs operated from escort carriers and captured airfields, establishing complete air supremacy over the last major Japanese stronghold outside the home islands. The statistics from Okinawa vividly illustrate the scale of this dominance. Corsairs flew over 15,000 combat sorties, claimed more than 500 aerial victories, and delivered thousands of tons of ordnance. Japanese pilots, many with less than 30 hours of flight training, faced systematic destruction. The few survivors recounted engagements lasting mere seconds, never even having the opportunity to aim their guns at the Corsairs that annihilated them. As Japan prepared for the invasion of its home islands, the prospect of facing thousands of Corsairs induced strategic paralysis. Japanese planners calculated that the Americans could deploy over 5,000 Corsairs from carriers and captured airfields. Against this formidable force, Japan could muster perhaps 2,000 flyable aircraft of all types, most of them obsolete, flown by pilots with minimal training. Admiral Soemu Toyoda, commander-in-chief of the combined fleet, later acknowledged that conventional aerial combat had become unfeasible. The only remaining strategy was to conceal aircraft for suicide attacks. The Corsair had rendered traditional fighter combat obsolete for Japanese aviation. When atomic bombs brought the war to an end in August 1945, they spared Japanese aviation from ultimate annihilation. Plans were in place for Operation Olympic, the invasion of Kyushu, where over 2,000 Corsairs would have operated from 48 aircraft carriers and a dozen captured airfields. Japanese pilots who survived expressed profound relief at avoiding this final confrontation, which they understood would have been an extermination, not a battle. In the immediate post-war period, American occupation forces brought Japanese military leaders to witness American aircraft manufacturing facilities. The Vought plant in Connecticut, still producing Corsairs, revealed the true scale of American industrial capacity. Individual factories manufactured more aircraft engines than all of Japan. Certain American states possessed greater aluminum production than the entire Japanese empire. Former Japanese naval officers, observing these production lines, finally grasped the utter impossibility of their wartime position. They had dared to challenge an industrial superpower with pre-industrial capacity, pitting pilots trained for individual combat against mass-produced machines of overwhelming technological superiority. The definitive statistics of Corsair operations throughout the Pacific War tell a story of absolute dominion. Total Corsairs produced 12,571. Total aerial victories, 2,140. Air-to-air losses, 189. Kill ratio, 11.3 to 1. Missions flown, over 64,000. The aerial bombardment capacity reached 15,621 tons. In terms of performance, its speed advantage over a baseline of 0 reached 66 miles per hour. Its climbing rate offered an advantage exceeding 1,000 feet per minute. The dive speed superiority was noted as being more than 140 miles per hour. Its altitude ceiling advantage was 3,900 feet. Regarding firepower, it held a 53% greater weight of ordnance. Comparing production, the peak monthly output of Corsairs reached 418 units, while all types of Japanese fighters combined were produced at a monthly peak of 250. American pilot training spanned 600 hours. In 1945, Japanese pilot training hours ranged from 40 to 60. Following the conflict, Japanese aviation engineers thoroughly examined captured Corsairs, utilizing them as benchmarks to grasp the extent of their technological deficit. Every system, hydraulics, electronics, metallurgy, and manufacturing processes, showcased advancements Japan had not conceived as possible. The impact of the Corsair was evident in every Japanese aircraft designed post-war. The insights gained from dissecting the aircraft that had so thoroughly dominated their predecessors profoundly shaped Japan's aerospace trajectory for many decades. American Corsair pilots often grappled with complex sentiments regarding their overwhelming advantage. Many felt their engagements devolved into mere executions rather than genuine combat, particularly in 1945 when confronting very young Japanese pilots flying outdated aircraft. The Corsair effectively industrialized aerial warfare. American aviators were not chivalrous knights engaging in aerial duels. They were skilled technicians operating vastly superior machinery. Though the Japanese remained steadfast in their warrior ethos until the very end, they confronted the stark reality of wielding traditional weaponry against advanced mechanized forces. The Corsair's supremacy instigated fundamental shifts within Japanese society in the aftermath of the war. The utter failure of spiritual fortitude against American technological prowess contributed to the discrediting of militaristic ideals, prompting a societal embrace of modernization through technology. The F4U Corsair demonstrably proved, daily and personally, to thousands of Japanese individuals that their entire worldview was fundamentally flawed. Spirit could not triumph over technology. Sheer willpower could not overcome industrial capacity. Bravery proved meaningless against overwhelming mechanical force. The narrative of Japanese pilots confronting the F4U Corsair ultimately represents a testament to technological determinism, etched in conflict and destruction. It underscores the principle that in the realm of industrialized warfare, manufacturing output triumphs over martial traditions. Engineering ingenuity surpasses individual courage. The Corsair did more than simply shoot down Japanese planes, it dismantled an entire military philosophy. Every Japanese pilot who encountered the Corsair and survived carried the same profound realization. We cannot contend with this. We cannot halt this. The cumulative effect of these individual losses fostered a collective understanding that transcended mere military defeat to become a civilizational epiphany. German representatives had arrived in America anticipating signs of vulnerability, only to discover an astonishing industrial might. Similarly, Japanese pilots had entered the war brimming with confidence in their perceived superiority in training, only to discover they were facing not merely a better aircraft, but the concentrated embodiment of a more advanced civilization's industrial power. The F4U Corsair stands as a monument to the principle that, in modern conflict, technological superiority amplified by industrial capability invariably leads to victory. For Japanese naval aviation, the Corsair served as judge, jury, and executioner. It declared their technology insufficient, their strategies outdated, and their guiding philosophy erroneous. The psychological progression from dominance to dread, From self-assurance to despair, from tactical innovation to suicidal assaults, was all meticulously measured by encounters with the Corsair. Each engagement with the distinctive bent-wing fighter eroded illusions, leaving only the unvarnished truth. Japan had challenged an industrial superpower with a warrior's spirit and suffered a total defeat. Today, meticulously restored, Corsair's grace air shows globally, their characteristic whine still conjuring memories for those who once associated the sound with an imminent harbinger of death. However, for those who face them in combat, the Corsair represents something more profound, a stark educator, a dispeller of false beliefs, and irrefutable evidence that, in contemporary warfare, the nation possessing superior manufacturing capabilities prevails over the nation fielding the bravest combatants. The Japanese pilots harbored a deep-seated fear of the F4U Corsair, not out of cowardice, but from a rational understanding that they were confronting not just a superior aircraft, but an overwhelming civilizational advantage. Their terror was a form of profound wisdom, the grim realization that everything they held to be true was mistaken, and that their demise would merely serve to validate their adversary's ascendancy. Ultimately, the Corsair accomplished what no amount of state-sponsored propaganda could achieve. It instilled in Japanese pilots a profound reluctance to take to the skies. Within that fear lay the genesis of Japan's metamorphosis from a militaristic empire to a peaceful, economically powerful nation. This transformation was forged in the crucible of fallen pilots who, far too late, learned that in the context of modern warfare, valor alone is insufficient when an adversary commands the very heavens.